The torchlight was still burning when Alpha Dorian raised his hand for silence. 300 wolves stood in the sacred circle, watching, waiting, and Mara felt every single pair of eyes land on her like stones. She had worn her best dress. She had braided her hair the way her mother taught her. She had believed him when he said tonight was the night everything would finally change. It did change, just not the way she thought. Dorian's voice cut through the night like a blade. I, Alpha Dorian of the Silverstone Pact, publicly reject Mara Cole as my fated mate. She is unworthy of this bond, unworthy of my title, and unworthy of standing beside any alpha in this territory. The gasp that moved through the crowd sounded like wind before a storm. Mara didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't shake. She stood perfectly still in the torchlight, feeling something inside her chest tear slowly apart, like fabric that had been pulled too thin for too long. And then she turned around. She walked through 300 wolves who parted for her like she was already dead, stepped past the last torch, and disappeared into the dark forest alone. What none of them saw, what none of them could have possibly known, was the figure standing at the treeline. Still, watching, amber eyes burning in the darkness. A man who hadn't entered pack territory in 40 years. A man whose name made alphas lower their gaze. He watched Mara walk past him into the dark, and something in his chest, something ancient and long buried, and impossible, moved. Chapter 1. The forest was cold. Mara kept walking anyway. She didn't have a direction. She didn't have a plan. She had 26 years of loving a man who had just handed her back like something he'd borrowed and no longer needed, and the only thing keeping her upright was the decision she'd made in that circle. Don't give them tears. Not one. The rejection bond was physical. That was the part no one warned you about. It felt like something essential had been yanked out from behind her sternum, leaving a hollow that the cold night air rushed into. Her wolf, the part of her that had always been quiet, always been less than the wolves around her, had gone completely silent. Not gone, just folded inward, like it was protecting itself from something too large to face. Mara pressed her palm against her chest and kept walking. She had known, somewhere deep and honest, that Dorian's feelings had cooled. She had felt it the way you feel weather changing, not in one moment, but in 100 small ones. The way he stopped reaching for her hand in public. The way his eyes moved past her when she entered a room. The way he'd asked her to wait just a little longer, for 3 years. She had waited. She had made herself smaller, quieter, and less demanding. And still it wasn't enough. You were never going to be enough for him, a voice said inside her. Not cruel, just honest in the way only your own mind can be. The pack always saw it. You were the only one who didn't. Mara stopped walking. She stood in the dark between the trees and let herself feel it, all of it, for exactly 30 seconds. The humiliation, the grief, the rage that lived underneath both of them like a river under ice. Then she exhaled and kept moving. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her. She only felt the shift in air, the slight change in temperature, the prickling at the back of her neck that her wolf usually used to signal danger. You're about to walk off a ridge. The voice was low, unhurried, like the person speaking had all the time in the world and no particular interest in alarming her. Mara stopped. She looked down. 3 feet ahead of her, the ground dropped away sharply into a ravine she hadn't seen in the dark. She looked behind her. A man stood about 10 feet back. Dark coat, dark hair, hands at his sides. He wasn't in a defensive stance, and he wasn't moving toward her. He was simply there, the way a stone is simply there. Like he'd always been in this exact spot. His eyes caught what little moonlight filtered through the canopy. Amber, not the yellow gold of a shifted wolf, something older. Deeper. I don't need help, Mara said. You need a flashlight at minimum, he replied. But I wasn't offering help. I was offering information. The ridge is 3 feet ahead. What you do with that is your business. She stared at him. He stared back. Calm. Patient. Not performing patience. Actually patient, in the way of someone who had stopped being impressed by urgency a long time ago. Who are you? She asked. Not someone from your pack. That's not an answer. No, he agreed. It's not. He didn't offer more. He didn't move. He simply waited, as if he had asked her a question and was giving her time to think. Something about it made Mara's skin prickle. Not with fear exactly, but with the particular electricity of standing near something you don't fully understand. "I'm fine," she said, which was a lie, but a functional one. "All right," he said, and he turned around and walked back into the trees. That was it. No argument, no offer to accompany her, no performance of concern. Mara stood at the edge of the ravine for a moment longer, then turned and walked parallel to it, picking her way more carefully through the dark. She didn't look back, but she was aware, in the way you're aware of a sound just past the edge of hearing, that he was still out there somewhere, watching. She reached the border town by dawn. It wasn't much, a cluster of buildings on the unmarked edge between Silverstone territory and the unclaimed lands beyond. The kind of place that existed in the gaps between pack maps, where exiles went, where half-bloods lived, where people who didn't fit anywhere else found the lowest possible version of belonging. Mar had only been here twice before, both times with Dorian on pack business. She'd noticed the way he looked at the people here. Not with cruelty, but with a particular brand of dismissal that she'd been too loyal to examine at the time. She examined it now, walking through the quiet early morning street. He looked at them the way he looked at me, she thought, like they were temporary problems that hadn't been solved yet. The house she was looking for was at the far end, small, stone, with dried herbs hanging from every window frame. She knocked. The woman who opened the door was ancient in the way mountains are ancient, not fragile, but settled. White hair, sharp dark eyes, a face that had stopped apologizing for anything it felt a long time ago. "Cress." She looked at Mara for exactly 1 second. "Come in," she said. "I'll put the kettle on." Cress had been expelled from a pack in the Eastern Territories before Mara was born. She never talked about why, and Mara had never asked, because there was an understanding between the two of them that stretched back to when Mara was 12 and had wandered here by accident on a dare and found an old woman who talked to her like she was worth talking to. They sat at the small kitchen table, tea between them. The silence was the comfortable kind. That night, Cress said, "Not a question." "He rejected me," Mara said, in front of everyone. Cress' expression didn't move, but her eyes sharpened. Public rejection. Full ceremony. 300 people. A pause. He had someone waiting. It wasn't a question either. Mara nodded. Serena. She was standing right there, like they'd rehearsed it. Cress wrapped both hands around her mug. It was probably rehearsed. The words landed quietly. Mara had suspected it. Hearing it spoken aloud was different. "The bond pain," Mara said. "It's bad. It'll ease. 3 or 4 days." My wolf went quiet. Cress looked up at that. Something shifted behind her eyes, a sharpening, a focusing, like a woman who just heard a word in a language she thought she'd never hear spoken again. "Let me see your collarbone," she said. "What?" "Pull your collar down." Humor an old woman. Mara set down her mug and pulled the neckline of her dress aside, revealing the skin over her collarbone. The rejection scar was there, faint, raw, the ghost of a bond that had been severed. But Cress wasn't looking at the scar. She was looking at something underneath it, something that Mara hadn't been able to see properly because it was on her own skin. But she'd felt it occasionally over the years, a warmth that came and went without reason, a faint pulse that didn't match her heartbeat. Cress set down her mug very carefully. "Mara," she said quietly, "how long have you had that mark?" "What mark?" "The rejection scar." "Not the scar. The one beneath it. The one that's glowing." Mara looked down. The mark was faintly luminous in the morning light, a thin, intricate pattern, like writing in a language that no longer had a name. She'd thought it was a birthmark. She'd had it her whole life. It had never glowed before. "That," Cress said, voice barely above a whisper, "is a seal. Someone put that on you when you were born." "A seal for what?" But before Cress could answer, the front door opened. Not with a knock, not with force, just opened. The man from the forest stood in the doorway. He looked at the mark on Mara's collarbone for exactly 1 second. Then he looked at Cress. "You know what that is," he said. "So do you," Cress said back. "Not afraid. Just be careful." He looked at Mara. "My name is Selim, and we need to talk." Chapter 2. Mara stood up so fast her chair scraped. You followed me, she said. Yes. The honesty of it was disarming. No excuse. No softening. Just a simple admission that sat in the room and didn't apologize for itself. That's not something you get to do, she said. I know. He stepped inside and Cress, Mara noticed, didn't tell him to leave. I'll explain why I did if you'll let me. If I don't, then you don't. But that mark is going to become a problem faster than you'd like, and you'll be better prepared for it if you understand what it is. Mara looked at Cress. Cress gave her the smallest nod. Mara sat back down, slowly, with her arms folded and her expression making it clear that she was not agreeing. She was simply choosing to hear him out, and those were two very different things. Selim pulled out the third chair and sat down like he belonged at the table. Not with arrogance, with the ease of a man who had long since stopped needing to perform comfort to feel it. He looked at the mark again, then at her face. You were born to a she-wolf named Werewolf, he said. Your father was listed on pack records as a low-ranking packless wolf named Wren. That's not who he was. Mara's jaw tightened. My father died when I was 4. I know. What do you know about my father? His name was Wren Ashvane. He was a nomadic alpha from the oldest line in these territories, a bloodline that traces back to the first wolves. Pre-pack, pre-territory agreements, pre-all of it. A pause. He was also running from people who wanted to use that bloodline. When he had a child, he made a choice. He found someone with the skill to seal what you were so that no one could find you. The kitchen was very quiet. So my mother knew, Mara said. Your mother commissioned the seal. She gave up everything to hide you. She told everyone your father was a nobody so that nobody would look too closely at you. Mara thought about her mother, about a woman who had raised her daughter alone in a mid-ranked pack without prestige or protection, quietly, stubbornly, never asking for anything, who had died when Mara was 16 and left her to navigate the pack on her own, who loved me in ways I probably never fully understood, Mara thought. What was she sealing me from? She asked. Selim leaned forward slightly. What did Cress say about the mark? She said it was a seal. It is. Specifically, it's a vessel seal. Your bloodline, your father's line, carries a rare trait. Once every few generations, a wolf is born who can stabilize another's power. Carry it. Anchor it. He paused. The person they're meant to anchor is called the Dark King. Silence. Then, you're the Dark King, Mara said flatly. Yes, and you've been looking for me. For 3 years. The seal made you invisible to anyone searching for the bloodline. I could feel the vessel existed somewhere. The bond between a king and his vessel creates a faint resonance, but I couldn't find you. His eyes met hers. Until 2 nights ago when the seal broke. Because of the rejection. Because of the rejection. Dorian severing the fated bond broke the outermost layer of your seal, like cracking the shell of something that was never meant to be opened that way. Something moved through his expression, brief, controlled, gone quickly. He broke it by accident. He was trying to discard you. Instead, he unlocked you. Mara absorbed that. So the man who rejected me in front of 300 people accidentally triggered my hidden royal heritage, she said slowly. Yes. That's almost funny. Almost, Selim agreed. Cress refilled the tea without comment. What does a vessel actually do? Mara asked. Selim was quiet for a moment. In the silence, she studied him. He was somewhere in his 40s in appearance, though something about him suggested that number was significantly inaccurate, with the kind of face that had been hardened by experience rather than age. Not unkind, but be careful. Every expression felt measured. The Dark King's bloodline carries enormous power, he said. Territorial dominance, the ability to command wolves across pack lines, access to abilities the other lines lost centuries ago. But it's also consuming. It accumulates faster than one body can manage. Without a vessel to stabilize it, to carry the excess, every Dark King eventually fractures. Fractures how? Loses control. Becomes violent. Unpredictable. His grandfather destroyed 4 packs before he finally collapsed. A beat. His father walked into the sea. Mara looked at him. So without me you die. Eventually. Yes. How long do you have? That's not why I'm here. That wasn't the question. His jaw shifted. 2 years. Maybe 3 if I'm careful. Mara pressed her hands flat on the table. She was doing the thing she always did when her emotions threatened to overflow, turning them into information, into structure, into something she could hold still and examine. And if I bond with you as the vessel, what happens to me? You'd be changed, not into something inhuman, but into something more than you currently are. Enhanced healing, extended life, the ability to feel and carry power that would level most wolves. Would it hurt? The initial bond? Yes. The ongoing connection? He considered. Not pain. More like weight. Carrying something significant. And it can't be undone. No. So you're asking me to permanently bind myself to a stranger 2 days after the worst night of my life, Mara said. I'm not asking you anything, he said quietly. I came to explain what the mark is and why it will start drawing dangerous attention now that it's visible. What you choose to do with that information is entirely your decision. Mara studied him. He held her gaze. Steady. No performance of desperation. No attempt to persuade. It was, she thought, possibly the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. You said dangerous attention, she said. How dangerous? Before he could answer, a sound reached them, low, rhythmic, getting closer. Wolves. Not Silverstone pack wolves. Something different. Something with a colder scent that Mara could feel through the window glass. Selim stood. Slowly. That's your answer, he said. 3 wolves came through the border town's main street, moving too fast for casual, too organized for random. They stopped at Cress's door. The one who knocked was a woman, mid-40s, silver-streaked hair, the kind of contained violence that lived in her posture rather than her expression. We're looking for a she-wolf traveling alone, she said when Cress opened the door. Recently rejected from Silverstone. She has a mark on her collarbone. Cress's face didn't change. A lot of people travel through here. This one would have arrived in the last few hours. The alpha who rejected her is offering a return bond, voluntary or otherwise, within the lunar cycle. Pack law. Pack law also says a wolf who's been publicly expelled can refuse reintegration. Pack law says a lot of things. We're here for the girl. From inside, pressed against the wall beside the doorframe, Mara heard all of it. Return bond, voluntary or otherwise. Dorian hadn't rejected her because he didn't want her. He'd rejected her to break the seal. Someone had told him to. The fury that moved through her was so clean and cold it almost felt like clarity. Behind her, Selim was very still. Silverstone enforcers, he said quietly, but not operating on Silverstone orders. Someone put them up to this. Who? Someone who knows what the mark means. His voice was flat. Someone who knew the rejection would break the seal and has been waiting. He stepped toward the door. Don't, Mara said. He paused. This is my fight, she said. There are 3 of them. I know. She moved past him. Stay back. She opened the door. The silver-haired woman looked at her. At the collarbone. At the glowing mark. There you are, the woman said. Here I am, Mara agreed. And I'm telling you now, before this gets complicated, I'm not going back. Not with you. Not with Dorian. Not voluntarily or otherwise. You can carry that message back to whoever sent you. That's not how this. The temperature dropped. Not gradually. Instantly, like a door had been opened in a different season entirely. All 3 wolves turned. Selim had stepped into the doorway. He hadn't shifted. He wasn't threatening. He was simply standing there, arms at his sides, and the atmosphere around him had changed in a way that Mara felt in her back teeth. The silver-haired woman's composure cracked. Just at the edges. Just for a second. But it cracked. King, she said. The word came out stiff. These lands aren't affiliated with any pack, Selim said. Which means the she-wolf standing in that doorway is not subject to pack law. She is subject to old law. And old law says a vessel under royal bloodline cannot be claimed, reclaimed, or coerced by a pack alpha under any circumstance. A long pause. Leave, he said. They left. Mara stood in the cold morning air watching them go. She didn't feel relieved. She felt like a coin that had been flipped and was still spinning. Someone sent them here already, she said. That fast? Yes. Which means someone has been watching. waiting for the seal to break. Yes. She turned around and looked at him. Okay, she said. Talk. Chapter 3. They left before noon. Mara didn't pack much. There wasn't much to pack. She said goodbye to Cress properly, which meant holding the old woman's hands for a moment and not saying anything, because nothing needed to be said. Cress pressed something into her palm before she let go. A small stone, smooth and dark, warm from being held. My mother gave me that when I was expelled, Cress said. She said it was so I'd remember that every piece of home you carry inside you is portable. Mara closed her fingers around it. Thank you, she said. For everything. For all of it. Cress patted her hand once, looked over her shoulder at Selim. I looked back at Mara. Be careful, she said. Not of him. He's not the danger. Be careful of the people around him who will decide what to think of you before you've opened your mouth. They traveled by vehicle for the first 4 hours. A dark SUV, no markings, driven by a silent man named Dax who seemed to communicate primarily through direction changes and occasional grim looks in the rearview mirror. Mara sat in the back beside Selim with approximately 18 inches of deliberate space between them and watched the landscape change as they moved further north and east. The terrain grew wilder. The trees are older. The light differed, thicker somehow, filtered through the canopy, so dense it felt like dusk even at midday. She had questions. She organized them in order of importance. Why do they call it the Dark Court, she asked. Because the first king built it underground, beneath the mountain. It was protection. Originally, the territory was contested and the court was vulnerable. Eventually, it became tradition. Is it actually underground? Parts of it. The residential chambers, the council hall, the elder vaults. The outer grounds and training spaces are above. You'll have natural light. A pause that felt almost considerate. I thought that might matter to you. She glanced at him. He was looking out the window. Why would you think about what might matter to me? Because you're about to walk into a place full of people who won't know what to make of you. And that's easier to navigate if at least the physical environment isn't another obstacle. Mara filed that away. What won't they know what to make of it? He was quiet for a moment. You're not what they're expecting, he said. Because I'm plus size, from a low-ranking pack. No title. Because you're human-shaped power wearing an ordinary life, he said. They'll see ordinary life first. Some of them will decide that's all there is. They'll be wrong, but the process of proving that takes time. Mara looked at him. He said it flatly. No performance of reassurance. No, oh, they'll love you. Just a clear-eyed description of a situation and an implied confidence that she could handle it. You're not very comforting, she said. No, but I'm accurate. I prefer accuracy. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. The mountain revealed itself gradually, first as a presence in the distance, then as a mass that blocked the horizon, then as something she was driving toward rather than seeing. The road became a path. The path became a tunnel entrance disguised as a rock face. And then they were inside the mountain, and it was nothing like Mara had imagined. It was vast. The main hall was carved from living rock, with ceilings that soared 30 feet above her head and walls lined with what looked like veins of crystal that caught the torchlight and multiplied it. It smelled of stone and pine and something older, the mineral cold of deep earth combined with the warm musk of hundreds of wolves living in proximity. And there were wolves everywhere. Not in wolf form, in human form, moving through the hall on various errands, conferring in clusters, training in a side corridor she could see through an archway. They were tall, most of them, striking in the uncanny way of supernatural beings, moving with the casual precision of people who had never been the weakest thing in a room. They all stopped when she walked in, every single one of them. The silence spread outward from the entrance in a wave. Mara kept her chin level. Let them look. She had spent 26 years being looked at by people deciding what she was worth. She knew how to stand inside that gaze and not be diminished by it. Selim walked beside her. That helped. Not because she needed protection, but because his presence said, I brought her here. I chose this. And whatever they thought of her, they thought it with that information attached. Your chambers are prepared, said a woman who materialized at Selim's left with the smooth efficiency of someone who had been waiting. Rhea. Mara knew her name before introductions because there was only one person in any power structure who looked at a newcomer with that particular brand of gracious hostility. Someone who had spent years being the most important woman in a powerful man's orbit and had just watched that status become complicated. She was beautiful in a cold, architectural way. Dark hair, pale eyes, perfectly composed. She looked at Mara the way you look at a storm system moving towards something you're responsible for. Calculating, concerned, professionally courteous. Rhea, Selim said. This is Mara Cole. She'll be staying in the South Wing. Of course. Rhea's smile was faultless. How unexpected and interesting. We're so glad you've arrived safely, Mara. You must be exhausted. The last few days sound like they've been quite the ordeal. They've had their moments, Mara said pleasantly. Rejected publicly, then whisked away to a foreign court by a man you've only just met. Most women would be overwhelmed. I'm not most women, Mara said. Rhea held her gaze for a beat. No, she said softly. I suppose not. She turned back to Selim, and the moment closed like a door. The south wing chambers were beautiful. High stone ceilings, a window that looked out onto a slice of actual sky, a fire already burning. Mara sat on the edge of the bed and finally, in private, allowed herself to feel the full weight of the last 24 hours. Her chest still ached from the severed bond. Her wolf was still quiet. But underneath both of those things, something else was happening. The mark on her collarbone was warm. Steadily, gently warm, like a coal that had been banked for years and was finally being given air. She pressed her fingers to it. What are you? She thought about it. What have you been all this time? No answer. Just warmth. A knock at the door. Come in, she said, expecting a court member with orientation information. It was Selim. He stood in the doorway with 2 mugs. It was such an ordinary gesture, so completely at odds with everything she associated with him, that she almost laughed. Tea, he said. Cress had a specific kind. I don't have exactly what she has, but this is close. Mara looked at the mugs. You made tea. Dax made tea. I carried it. The distinction matters to you. Accuracy matters to me. He held one out. She took it. He didn't come fully into the room, stayed in the doorway, which she appreciated. It was a small recognition of the fact that this was her space, even if everything else about her situation was entirely outside her control. What happens tomorrow? She asked. I'd like you to meet the court's elder. She can tell you more about the vessel bond than I can. After that, what happens with Dorian? A pause. What do you want to happen? I want to understand why he did it. Whether someone told him to reject me or whether he chose it. She wrapped her hands around the mug. It matters. The difference matters. I'll find out, Selim said. You don't have to. I'll find out, he said again. Quieter. Final in the way of a promise rather than an argument. Mara looked at him for a moment. Why are you being kind to me? She asked. The question seemed to catch him slightly off guard. Not enough to show it in any dramatic way. Just a small recalibration behind his eyes. You had a bad night, he said. People have bad nights all the time. You don't make tea for all of them. No, he agreed. I don't. He left before she could ask anything more. Mara held the warm mug and stared at the fire and thought about the way he'd said, I don't, the way it had sounded less like an answer and more like the beginning of one. Later that night, she couldn't sleep. She pulled on her coat and wandered, following the faint sounds of the mountain at rest until she found a chamber that opened onto a small carved balcony looking out at nothing but dark sky and the tops of trees far below. Selim was already there. He was standing at the stone railing, looking out, and his posture was entirely different from the controlled, measured man who had sat across from her at Cress's table. His shoulders were lower. His face was unguarded. He looked like someone who came here to be alone with something he couldn't share in company. Mara almost retreated. Then he said, without turning, insomnia isn't new. You can stay if you want. She came and stood beside him. Not too close. Left space. They looked out at the dark together for a while without speaking, and the silence was the kind she recognized from Cress's kitchen. Not empty, just at rest. Does it get worse? She asked eventually. The power. The fracturing. He considered the question seriously, which she was beginning to understand was just how he operated. In the last 6 months, yes. I managed the council meeting last week, but there was a moment where I nearly lost containment. No one noticed, but I noticed. That scared you? Yes. Can you talk about it? The fear. Not easily. Would you try? A long pause. The trees moved below them. Somewhere in the dark, a wolf howled. One of the court patrols, she guessed. Every dark king before me died badly, he said. My father. I was there. I saw what happened. He was the most controlled, disciplined person I've ever known. And in the end, it didn't matter. The power took him anyway. He looked at me at the end, and he wasn't my father anymore. A pause. I promised myself I wouldn't end that way. That when it came for me, I'd manage it on my own terms. And now there might be another option, Mara said. And now there might be another option, he agreed. Which is more complicated than dying quietly in some ways, because it requires trusting someone. He looked at her, directly, for the first time with no agenda or strategy in it. Yes, he said. Mara held his gaze. I understand that particular problem, she said. Something in his expression softened, just at the edges, just for a moment. I imagine you do, he said. They stayed on the balcony for another hour, not talking much, just the present. And when Mara finally went back to her room, the mark on her collarbone was warm the whole way there. Chapter 4. The Elder's chamber was the deepest room in the mountain. Mara followed Selim through corridors that grew older as they descended, the carved stone giving way to raw rock, the torches more widely spaced, the air carrying the mineral cold of something that had never been warm. Her name is Fun, Selim said as they walked. She's the last threadkeeper. They're rare, wolves born with the ability to read bloodlines like text. She's been in this court for longer than I've been alive. How old is she? Old enough that she stopped counting and started estimating. The door to Fun's chamber was low and unassuming, the kind of door that didn't advertise what it led to. Selim knocked. I already know you're there, said a voice from inside. Come in and stop treating the door like a formality. Fun was small. That was the first thing Mara noticed. Small and very still, seated at a table covered in objects that had the quality of things long-handled, worn smooth, warm-looking, charged with whatever accumulated meaning came from decades of being near the same person. Her eyes were filmed with age, but focused in a way that made Mara feel seen down to the cellular level. Sit, Finn said. Not unkindly, just efficiently. Both of you. I want to look at you together. Mara sat. Selim sat beside her, closer than he'd been before, she noticed. Their arms nearly touched. Finn looked at them for a long time without speaking. Then she reached out and took Mara's hands in both of hers. The touch was gentle. The old woman's eyes went distant, then sharpened, then went distant again, like someone reading text in flickering light. Selim was very still. Mara waited. There it is, Finn said quietly. Not to anyone in particular. There it is. She released Mara's hands and looked at Selim. She's not just a vessel, Finn said. Selim's jaw tightened. Explain. I mean that what she carries is not a passive quality. Most vessels are stabilizers. They absorb excess power. They anchor. They buffer. She does all of that, yes. But Ren Ashvane's bloodline has a second trait. One I've read about but never seen. Finn's voice was careful. His line doesn't just carry power. They amplify it. Selectively. With intention. Silence. Meaning. Mara asked. Meaning that if you choose to bond with him, truly bond, not just proximity bonding, but the full vessel claiming, you don't just stabilize his power. You shape it. Direct it. You and he, together, become something that hasn't existed in 500 years. Finn looked between them. The last king vessel pair of this bloodline ended a territorial war that had run for 60 years. They did it in 3 days. How? Mara asked. Nobody knows exactly. The records from that time are incomplete. But the accounts all say the same thing. Finn looked at her steadily. They walked into the worst conflict on the continent, and everyone on both sides stopped. Not because they were forced, because something in the presence of that pair made the wolves around them remember what they were fighting for and decide it wasn't worth it. A long pause. That's not power, Mara said slowly. That's something else. Yes, Finn agreed. That's why the bloodline was sealed. not to hide it from enemies, to protect it until the right time. She squeezed Mara's hand once. Whoever sealed you, girl, loved you enough to wait. Mara thought of her mother. Her throat tightened. She didn't look at Selim, but she was aware of him. The slight change in his breathing, the way his stillness had shifted from controlled to something more like held. Is there a risk to her? Selim asked. His voice was level, but the question was not. There's always risk. The amplification goes both ways. She'll feel his pain, his anger, his grief when they're linked. She'll carry that too. Finn looked at Mara. It's not a small thing. Don't let anyone tell you it is. I won't, Mara said. Good. Finn let go of her hands. Now go. Both of you. You have a great deal to think about and very little time to do it in. They walked back up through the mountain corridors without speaking. Halfway up, Mara stopped. You knew, she said. Some of that. You knew it wasn't just stabilization. I suspected. I wasn't certain. Would you have told me? He turned to face her. Yes. Before or after you convinced me to bond? Before. Regardless of whether it changed your answer. A pause. I told you. I'm not going to trap you in something you didn't choose fully. That includes choosing it with partial information. Mara studied him. Why does that matter to you so much? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, because I know what it's like to have choices made for you by people who thought they knew better. The seat I sat on was not one I was given time to decide about. His voice was very even. Too even. I was 18 when my father started fracturing. I was 23 when he was gone. I was the only one left. Nobody asked me if I was ready. Nobody asked me what I wanted. The corridor was very quiet around them. I'm sorry, Mara said. Simply, without trying to make it larger. He looked at her like the simplicity of it surprised him. I'm not telling you for sympathy, he said. I know. I'm sorry anyway. Another long pause. We should keep moving, he said. We should, she agreed. But neither of them moved for another moment. Just stood in the stone corridor with the torches flickering between them, looking at each other with the careful honesty of two people who had gotten more truth in 2 days than either of them was used to. The court at dinner that evening was a different experience from the silent arrival. The dining hall was large and communal, long tables, the kind of meal that assumed everyone ate together, which Mara found both overwhelming and strangely comforting. At Silverstone, rank-determined seating and silence was the safest option if you weren't certain of your position. Here, noise was everywhere. Arguments, laughter, the clatter of people who had lived in close proximity long enough to have stopped being polite to each other in the best possible way. Mara sat between Selim and a large, warm-faced man named Garrett. Not, she learned quickly, the Garrett from Dorian's pack, but the senior general of the Dark Court, who had the bearing of someone who had fought 100 battles and the sense of humor of someone who had survived them all. So, Garrett said cheerfully, loading his plate, you're the one who broke the signal? The vessel seal going active lit up every resonance monitor we have. Dax thought we were under attack. Technically, Mara said, someone else broke the signal. I just stood there. Standing there while someone publicly rejects you in front of 300 people takes a particular kind of nerve. He passed her the bread. I heard you didn't cry. Who told you that? Court gossip moves fast. We had 3 separate accounts before you even arrived. He grinned. The version going around right now has you setting something on fire when you left. Mara laughed. Genuinely. The first real laugh in 2 days. It surprised her. She felt it surprise Selim too. Felt him glance at her from the other side. Nothing was set on fire, she said. Disappointing. The setting fire version is much better. Garrett topped up her cup. Don't worry. By the time it's been retold another 5 times, you'll have called down lightning. Rhea sat at the far end of the table, watching. Not constantly, not obviously, but Mara felt it, the periodic quality of attention from that direction, like a lighthouse beam sweeping back every few minutes. After the meal, when the hall was breaking up into smaller clusters, Rhea approached. She was gracious. That was the thing about her. The hostility was always dressed so beautifully. I hope the chambers are comfortable, Rhea said. Very. Thank you. And you're adjusting? It can be a lot, arriving somewhere so different. I've adjusted to difficult things before. Of course you have. A small, measured pause. I hope you don't mind my saying, we're all a little uncertain how to think about your situation. The vessel bond is ancient law, but it's been a very long time since we've had to consider what it means practically. Practically meaning what? Meaning the court has a structure, roles that are established and understood. Introducing a new dynamic takes adjustment. She smiled. I'm not suggesting any difficulty, only that patience on everyone's part will be valuable. I'm a patient person, Mara said. I'm sure you are. Rhea glanced briefly at Selim across the room. We all want what's best for him. I hope that's something we share. I don't know him well enough yet to know what's best for him, Mara said. But I know what's honest. And I'll always start there. Something behind Rhea's composure shifted. Not cracks, exactly. More like new information being processed. That, Rhea said after a moment, might actually be exactly what he needs. It didn't sound like she was entirely pleased about it. Chapter 5. 3 days into the dark court. Mara had begun to find her footing. Not in the political sense. The court's social geography was complex and she was still mapping it. But in the simpler sense of knowing which corridors led where, which members of the court were curious versus hostile, and where the kitchen was, which was its own form of power. She'd also discovered that her mark was becoming more active. It glowed more consistently now, visible in dim light, faintly warm throughout the day. And her wolf, which had gone so quiet after the rejection, was stirring again. Not fully, not back to what it had been, but present, attentive, like an animal waking slowly from a deep sleep and scenting the air. She was in the training yard on the 4th morning, watching 2 court wolves run a combat exercise when Selim appeared beside her. You're studying their technique, he said. I'm noting what I don't know how to do, she said. Which is most of it. Pack training at Silverstone was basic. Female wolves didn't do combat rotation unless they ranked into it. Did you rank into it? No. He was quiet for a moment. Would you like to? Mara looked at him. Learn combat. Learn what you weren't taught. You have abilities emerging that are going to need direction. The mark on its own is manageable. But as the vessel bond continues to strengthen even without full claiming, and it will strengthen, the proximity alone is enough to accelerate it, you're going to start feeling pressure you don't have a framework for. You mean the power? Yes. She felt it already, actually. Moments of something surplus, like a current moving through her that had nowhere to go. When she was emotional, when she felt anger or grief, or the specific ache of the rejection bond's ghost, the mark pulsed hard. Lights had flickered in her room twice the previous night. Okay, she said. Teach me. I'll work with you directly. It'll be faster. Won't that accelerate the vessel bond further? Yes. She looked at him. You said that it was acceptable. It is, if you're willing. The bond will accelerate whether I train you or not. Proximity is doing that already. Better to accelerate it with intention and support than to have it surge uncontrolled. He met her gaze, but only if you're willing. The choice is yours. You keep saying that. I'll keep saying it until you stop needing to hear it, he said. Which means I may be saying it for a while. Mara held his gaze for a moment. All right, she said. Train me. They started that afternoon in a lower chamber that was quieter than the main training yard. What Selim taught her was nothing like combat. It was more like breathing, learning to feel where the power lived in her body and how to let it move without fighting it or being overwhelmed by it. Don't try to contain it, he said. That's the wrong instinct. Containment fails eventually. Instead, find the center of it and let it radiate outward slowly, like heat from a fire rather than an explosion. That's a distinction that's easier to describe than to do, Mara said. Yes, that's why we're practicing. He stood close when she worked, close enough that the vessel bond's proximity effect was active. She could feel it, a warm resonance, like 2 notes played together that were close enough in pitch to create a harmonic. It was strange and not uncomfortable. What was uncomfortable was the rest of it. His nearness. The particular way he paid attention when she was working, fully present, not distracted, watching her with the focused patience of someone who genuinely wanted to see her succeed. Mara had not had a lot of people in her life who watched her that way. You're thinking about something, he said. I'm trying to find the center of the power. You found it twice and backed away from it twice. He stepped around to face her. What's stopping you? Mara exhaled. The last time I let myself want something completely, I stood in front of 300 wolves and had it taken away publicly, she said. So, Selim was quiet. That's not what this is, he said finally. I know it's not. That's not the issue. The issue is that knowing something is different from feeling it. Yes, he looked at her steadily. But you've been moving toward this every day since you arrived. Not away from it. Toward it. She met his gaze. The harmonic between them was stronger than it had been an hour ago. I know, she said quietly. Something in the room changed. The air, the silence, the quality of attention between them. He stepped back first. Deliberately. Again, he said. From the beginning. But she noticed that he'd stepped back with effort. And that felt important. On the 5th day, news arrived. Dax brought it to the morning briefing. A sealed report that he handed to Selim with the expression of someone delivering a live coal. Selim read it without comment, then passed it to Mara. She read it. Dorian had filed a formal reclamation declaration under old pack law, a process by which a rejecting alpha could attempt to reclaim a fated mate within one lunar cycle on the grounds that the initial rejection was coerced or uninformed. The declaration was legally functional. It was also, according to the supporting documentation, based on testimony from someone who had told Dorian that Mara's bloodline was dangerous, that she was being remotely influenced by a hostile foreign power, that her apparent normalcy was cover for an infiltration mission, that the rejection was in fact protecting the pack from a planted operative. Someone had told Dorian a detailed, sophisticated lie, and he had believed it. He had rejected her because he thought she was a spy. Who told him that? Mara said, someone who knew enough about your bloodline to understand that the rejection would break the seal. Someone who wanted the seal broken and needed a believable reason for the alpha to do it. Selim's voice was carefully level. They used him to unlock you. He's as much a victim of this as you are. Mara sat with that for a long moment. She thought about Dorian, not the Dorian of the torch circle, pointing and pronouncing, but the Dorian of years before. The man who had found her first, who had looked at her and felt the pull of the fated bond, came to her in private because he wasn't sure how to handle it. The man who had been, underneath his failings, genuinely uncertain of what he deserved. A weak man who had been handed a story that made his weakness feel like duty. She was angry. She was. But underneath the anger was something older and quieter. Grief. For what it could have been. For the years spent hoping. The lunar cycle ends in 2 days, Selim said. Legally, if he presents the reclamation declaration before the cycle closes, he has a claim on you under pack law. That law is ancient. Yes, but it's not null. Other territories would use it as grounds for a challenge if I simply refused to honor it. He paused. There is one thing that would supersede it. Mara already knew what he was going to say. A vessel claiming, she said. Yes. If the bond between us is formally claimed before the cycle closes, old law takes precedence. No alpha claim, regardless of its legal standing, supersedes a declared vessel bond. It's essentially royal authority. The room was very quiet. So we're back to the question, Mara said. We're always back to the question. But now there's a deadline. He looked at her directly. I want you to know that the deadline changes nothing about my position. If you say no, I will find another legal avenue. If it takes time, it takes time. I am not asking you to decide based on a clock. But the clock exists. Yes. Mara pressed her fingers to the mark on her collarbone. Warm, steady, patient. She thought about standing on the balcony with him, about the names on the wall, about the way he stepped back when he needed to step back, and how clearly it cost him. She thought about what it felt like to be chosen, genuinely chosen, by someone who saw her clearly and chose anyway. I need a day, she said. You have a day, he said. That evening, something unexpected happened. Dorian arrived, not with enforcers, not with a legal team, alone at the mountain's outer gate, requesting a private audience with Mara. She thought about refusing. Then she thought about what it meant to close a chapter properly versus simply running from it. I'll see him, she told Selim. I'll be just outside. You don't need to. I know. He held her gaze. I'll be just outside. Dorian looked smaller than she remembered. Not physically, he was still the same broad-shouldered, well-built man she'd known for years. But the authority that had always surrounded him like a second coat had diminished, somehow. He looked like a man who had recently been shown a reflection he didn't recognize. I didn't know, he said, before she could speak. About your bloodline. About any of it. I was told. I know what you were told, Mara said. He stopped. You know. Someone gave you a story that made rejection feel like protection. They used you to break my seal. She kept her voice even. You were lied to, Dorian. But you were also willing to believe it. And that willingness was already in you before they came along. He was quiet. That's the part that was yours, she said. Not a lie. The willingness. Yes. His voice was rough. You're right. They sat with that for a moment. I'm not going back, Mara said. Not to Silverstone. Not to the bond. That's finished. I know. I'm not here to, he stopped. Started again. I'm here because I need you to know I'm sorry. Not as a legal strategy. Just as what's true. I'm sorry. For the ceremony. For the years before it when I asked you to wait and wasn't honest about why. For believing something without asking you first. Mara looked at him. I accept that, she said. Not for you. For me. I'm not going to carry your bad choices along with mine. Something in his face broke slightly. Relieved. Ashamed. Both. You're going to stay here, he said. Yes. With him. Yes. He nodded. Slowly. He looks at you, Dorian said. Like you're the only solid thing in the room. Mara said nothing. Good, Dorian said softly. That's good. He left. And Mara sat alone for a few minutes in the small anteroom and breathed through the closing of something she had carried for a very long time. Chapter 6. She went to find him. Not because the lunar cycle's clock pushed her. Not because the politics demanded it. Because she had spent a day sitting with the question and arrived, quietly and completely, at her answer. He was in the chamber with the wall of names. Standing the way he stood when he didn't know anyone was watching. Shoulders lower. Hands open at his sides. The weight of everything he carried visible in the line of his back. I'm not interrupting, she said. He turned. No. She came to stand beside him. Looked at the names carved into the stone. Dozens of them in different hands, different styles, accumulated over decades. Tell me one, she said. He looked at the wall. The one in the top left corner. Nira. She was a court healer. She died protecting the eastern border during a territorial raid 40 years ago. She was 22. She made terrible jokes and the best bread in the mountain, and I've never found anyone who could replicate the recipe. Mara looked at the name. She sounds wonderful, she said. She was. A pause. They all were. That's the point of the wall. Not to document failure. To remember that they were specific people. Not losses. People. Mara turned to look at him. Selim. He looked at her. I've been thinking about what I want, she said. Not what the bloodline means, not what the politics require, not what the lunar cycle demands. What I actually want. She held his gaze. I want this. I want the bond. I want to stop being a secret and start being something I was apparently always meant to be. A breath. And I want to do it with you. Not because of the vessel connection. Because of the balcony and the tea Dax made and the way you asked me what I wanted before you told me what you needed. The chamber was very still. You have until. I know when the cycle closes. That's not why I'm here tonight. She stepped slightly closer. I'm here because I'm done waiting. I waited 3 years for Dorian to choose me. I'm not spending another year circling something true because I'm afraid of being wrong again. You could be wrong about me, he said. You should know that. I know you have 40 years of walls and a room full of grief and a problem with letting people close to you, she said. I know you'll fight your own instincts every time this gets difficult. I know you're going to push me away at least once before you trust this fully. His jaw tightened. And you still want this, he said. I still want this. He looked at her for a long time. The amber of his eyes had that other quality moving behind it, the ancient, deep thing that was more than wolf, more than human. The power that lived in him like a river behind a dam. If we do this, he said carefully, it isn't temporary. It isn't provisional. It's permanent, she said. I know. I'm not interested in the temporary anymore. Something shifted in his face. Not suddenly, it moved slowly, like stone warming in sunlight. All the controlled distance, the measured space, the careful restraint he'd maintained since the first night in the forest. Mara, yes, I've spent 40 years alone because I decided it was safer than losing someone else. His voice was very quiet. And then you walked into Cressa's kitchen and told me to go to hell, and I've been. I can't, he stopped. Breathed. I tried again. You make me want to stop being so careful. And I haven't wanted anything like that in decades. Then stop being careful, she said. He crossed the remaining distance between them and kissed her. It was not tentative. After all the restraint, all the careful management of space and word and expression, it was nothing like tentative. It was the thing itself, honest and complete, and Mara kissed him back with the same honesty, with 26 years of waiting to be chosen pressed into it. The mark on her collarbone blazed. The chamber filled with light, not harsh, not violent, but the warm, golden outpouring of something that had been sealed for a very long time finally opening fully. When they finally separated, both of them breathed hard in the sudden quiet. That, Mara said, was overdue. Something happened to his face that she had never seen there before. Full, unguarded, radiant in the quietest possible way. He laughed. Short, genuine, surprised out of him. Yes, he said. It was. The formal vessel claiming happened the next morning, in the elders' chamber, witnessed by Fun and the senior court. It was not a performance. That was the first thing Mara noted. There was no ceremony for the sake of ceremony. No audience positioning, no theatrics. It was old and direct and real in the way that things are real when they've been true for a long time before you said them aloud. Selim and Mara sat facing each other. Finn spoke words in a language Mara didn't know, but understood, somehow, the way you understand music even without the words. Selim pressed his hand over the mark on her collarbone. She pressed her hand over his heart, and the bond opened. It was vast. That was the only word. The resonance she'd felt in proximity for days became a full connection, and what moved through it was enormous. His power, his grief, his 40 years of solitude and the bone-deep relief of it ending. His fear, still present, still real, and underneath it, something she hadn't expected. Tenderness, complete and unguarded and directed entirely at her. She let him feel what moved through her in return. All of it. The rejection's wound, the grief of the years wasted, the stubborn, persistent hope that had survived everything, the very specific joy of standing somewhere and being seen for what she actually was. His eyes went bright. She didn't look away. It's done, Finn said quietly. The room was still. Then Garrett, standing near the back wall, cleared his throat loudly. Right then, does this mean I can stop calling her the vessel and start calling her something appropriate? Her name is Mara, Selim said. Mara it is. And also, for the record, Garrett looked around the room. I was right. I told Dax on day one. He owes me a very expensive bottle of wine. Laughter moved through the chamber, warm and genuine. Even Rhea, standing at the edge of the room with careful composure, allowed herself a small, real smile. Chapter 7. The claiming should have been the end of the immediate danger. It wasn't. 2 days after the ceremony, the message arrived. Not from Dorian, not from the silver-haired enforcers, not from any of the territorial powers they'd been tracking. From somewhere else entirely. It was a single piece of parchment, no seal, delivered to Dax by a human courier who had been paid and sent from a city 3 territories away. The courier knew nothing about who had given it to him. The message said, "The vessel has claimed the king. The lock is open. We have been patient for 500 years. We will not be patient much longer. The 12. Selim read it twice. Passed it to Mara. She read it. The 12, she said. Finn mentioned 12 sealed bloodlines. Yes, he was already at the map table, Garrett and Dax flanking him, Rhea on the other side with a different document. If the 12 sealed bloodlines went active simultaneously when our bond completed, and they did, we registered the resonance, then either all 12 vessels have bonded with their counterparts, or someone is activating them by force. Or, Mara said slowly, the 12 are not the vessels. They're the ones who've been hunting the sealed bloodlines. Everyone in the room looked at her. The bloodlines were hidden by someone who foresaw something coming, she said. My mother didn't seal me to protect me from a random threat. Someone specific was coming for the bloodline. Someone who needed what the bloodline carries. She looked at the message. What if whoever sealed us was protecting us from the 12? And the 12 have been hunting for all 12 bloodlines for 500 years because they need all 12 to do something. Silence. Need 12 Vessel King pairs to do what? Garrett said. I don't know. But 500 years of patience suggests something very large. Selim was looking at her with the expression she'd started to recognize as genuine assessment, not suspicion, but the intense, focused attention of someone who was updating their understanding. Fun, he said. We need Fun. The Elder's chamber again. Fun listened to the message, listened to Mara's reasoning, was very still for a long time. The 12, she said finally. I know that name. It's old, older than the court, older than the territorial agreements. In the records from the early binding era, there's a faction mentioned. Wolves who believed the mate bond was inefficient. That power shouldn't be distributed across pairs who might choose poorly, love unwisely, die young. She looked at the wall behind her. They believed power should be collected, consolidated, given to those who could use it without the vulnerability of love. They wanted to harvest the vessel bonds, Mara said. Yes, a vessel bonded to a king generates enormous power, more than either generates alone. If you could break the bond and extract that amplified power, contain it in another form. You'd have something extraordinary, Selim said. You'd have something catastrophic, Fun corrected. Love-forged power extracted by force is corrupted power. The old text called it Shatterlight. It's strong, but it's wrong in the way that a broken bone healed incorrectly is wrong. Functional on the surface, catastrophically unstable underneath. They want to break 12 vessel bonds and harvest the power, Mara said. They want to break the bonds at their peak, Finn said, which is shortly after claiming, when the bond is new and the power is highest. She looked between them. You're currently in your most vulnerable window. Both of you. Later that night, in their chambers, which still felt new and slightly impossible to Mara, she sat at the edge of the window and looked at the mountain dark outside. Selim sat beside her. We should talk about what this means, she said. Yes. There are people coming for us who have been planning this for 500 years and have presumably gotten very good at it. Yes. And we've been bonded for 2 days. Yes. He turned to look at her. If you're going to tell me you're afraid, you don't need to qualify it. I'm not going to tell you I'm afraid, she said. I'm going to tell you that I was afraid of Dorian's opinion for 3 years, and I stayed anyway. And that was a much smaller thing than this. She met his eyes. This is worth being afraid of. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and tucked her hair back from her face. The gesture deliberate, careful, learning her. The bond is strong, he said. Stronger than it should be 2 days in. Finn said that's the amplification. Your bloodline accelerates it. He paused. I can feel you, Mara. Not just your presence. Your steadiness. Is that strange? It's the least strange thing that's happened to me in 40 years. She leaned into him. Let the bond between them settle into the quiet, warm, present, the kind of weight that was comfort rather than burden. What do we do about the 12? She asked. We do what the last King Vessel pair did, he said. Nobody knows what they did. Finn said everyone on both sides of a 60-year war stopped. The accounts say they walked in. He looked down at her. So we walk in. We find the 12 before they find all 12 bloodlines. We make them stop. That sounds significantly easier to say than to do. Yes, the suggestion of a smile. That's why we have Garrett. Mara laughed. And through the bond, she felt him feel it. Her laugh landing in him like light landing in a room that had been dark for a long time. 3 days later, the dark court moved. Not all of it. The mountain held the elder, the hearth, the permanent population. But the inner circle mobilized with the efficiency of people who had been preparing for some version of this their whole lives. Selim at the center, Mara at his right hand. Garrett and Dax and Rhea and a dozen of the court's best, moving out into the pre-dawn dark with the specific quiet of people who understood that what they were walking toward was larger than any of them individually and that this was not a reason to stop. Mara walked and felt the bond humming steadily between her and Selim. The amplification Finn had described as theoretical now entirely real, the power moving between them like breath. She pressed her fingers to the mark on her collarbone. Warm. Steady. Home. She thought about the girl who had stood in the torch circle in her best dress, waiting to be chosen. She had been chosen, just not by who she expected, or when she expected, or in any way she could have prepared for. Life rarely warns you, she thought, about the things that matter. Ready, Selim said, close enough that only she could hear. She looked at the dark ahead of them, at the road that led toward something 500 years in the making. I've been ready for longer than I knew, she said. His hand found hers in the dark. They walked forward together. Chapter 8. The 12 had a location. Dax had found it through 3 days of cross-referencing territorial resonance data, a point in the unclaimed lands at the center of all 12 bloodline signatures, the apex of a pattern that became obvious once you knew to look for it. An old place, older than any current pack. Stone walls half buried in the hillside, the remnants of something that predated the territorial system entirely. They arrived at dusk. The 12 were already there. Not 12 individuals, 12 groups. Each had a single wolf at its center. And Mara looked at them and understood immediately. They found the others, she said. Some of them, Selim said quietly. Not all bonded pairs. Some vessels who bonded alone, without the king counterpart. Some kings whose vessels haven't been found yet. He scanned the gathering. They've been collecting for years. At the center of it all stood a woman. Tall, white-haired, with the ageless quality of someone who had long since stopped being bound by ordinary time. She looked at Mara and Selim with the particular attention of someone who had been waiting for a specific thing and just watched it arrive. The last pair, the woman said. Her voice carried without effort. The amplifiers. We've been patient. 500 years, Mara said. 600, actually. Your historians are imprecise. The woman looked at Mara with something that was almost respect. You bonded faster than we expected. Most vessels take months to trust their king. I had good reasons to move quickly, Mara said. Yes, we arranged some of them. The cold of that landed hard. Dorian, the false information, the enforcer team, all arranged. You used him, Mara said. You used Dorian to break the seal. We used a willing tool. He was already looking for reasons. We simply provided them. The woman spread her hands. This is not cruelty, child. This is a necessity. The power your bond generates, the power all these bonds generate, is needed for what's coming. What's coming, Selim said. Something that makes a 600-year wait look brief. She looked at him steadily. I won't pretend I'm not about to try to take what you carry. But I'm not a villain in a story. I'm someone who has seen what's approaching and understands that the only way to survive it is to consolidate. By breaking bonds. By transforming them. Restructuring the power distribution. She paused. Some vessels survived the process. Some, Mara said. Enough. The silence between them was charged. Then Mara did something that surprised everyone, including Selim. She stepped forward, not toward the woman with hostility, toward the assembled wolves, the other vessels, the partial pairs, the isolated powers, the wolves who had been gathered here by a 600-year design and were now standing in the dark watching 2 strangers arrive. She looked at them, at their faces, the ones who were afraid, the ones who resigned, the ones who had been brought here under circumstances they hadn't chosen. I know what it's like, Mara said, loudly enough for all of them, to have someone else make decisions about your life and call it necessity. To be moved around like a piece on a board by people who have decided they know better. The assembled wolves were very still. I was rejected publicly by someone who had been lied to about who I was. I was used as a tool to unlock a power I didn't even know I had. And I walked from that into a court full of strangers and had to decide what I was going to build out of what was left. She felt Selim behind her. Through the bond. His steadiness, his attention, his trust. You don't have to be an instrument, she said. None of you do. What you carry is yours. The bonds between you are yours. No one gets to decide what to do with that except you. The white-haired woman made a sharp gesture. This is sentiment. This is a choice, Mara said, which is the only thing that makes power worth having. She reached back. Selim took her hand, and the bond between them opened fully, not as a weapon, not as a shield, but as itself. The amplification Finn had described, the warmth that two people generate when they have chosen each other with clear eyes and full hearts, moved outward from them in a wave. Mara had expected it to feel like force, like impact. It felt like recognition. The wolves around them, the ones who were afraid, the ones who were resigned, felt it and recognized it for what it was. Not power being wielded at them, power reminding them of what they already had. The white-haired woman watched the ripple move through the gathering. I watched it change faces, watched the assembled wolves turn toward each other, toward their own partial bonds, their own unclaimed connections, with expressions that had shifted from resignation to something more complex. You can't, she started. We're not doing anything, Mara said. We're just standing here. It was exactly what the records had said. The last amplifier pair hadn't fought a war. They'd walked into one and let what they were speaking for itself. The white-haired woman looked at the gathering, her gathered pieces, her 600-year project, and saw it shifting out of her hands. Not through force, through something she had spent centuries believing was a vulnerability. She looked at Mara. Where did you come from? She said. And it wasn't a strategic question. It was a genuine one. A village market, Mara said. A mid-ranked pack. Nowhere anyone was looking. A long pause. That was the point, I suppose, the woman said quietly. Yes, Mara said. I think it was. It didn't end with a battle. There were tense hours, negotiations that stretched through the night, facilitated by Selim and Rhea and Garrett with the particular expertise of people who understood that old grievances required old patience to untangle. The white-haired woman, Sereth, Mara learned, one of the original architects of the sealing system who had then spent centuries trying to undo what she'd helped create, was not a simple villain. She was someone who had lived long enough to become desperate about something she had failed to prevent by other means. The thing she feared was coming. It was real, and it would require coordinated power to face. But the coordination could be chosen, voluntary, built between pairs who understood what they were protecting. Not harvested, not forced. It'll take longer this way, Sarah said at dawn, sitting at a rough table with Selim and looking considerably older than she had the night before. Yes, Selim said. Things worth doing usually do. She changed the shape of tonight, Sarah said, glancing at Mara across the campfire. The girl from nowhere. She has a name, Selim said. Mara. And she didn't change the shape of anything. She just reminded people of what they'd forgotten. Sarah looked at him. On the way he said the name. You're different, she said. Yes, he agreed. I am. They went home 3 days later. The mountain received them with the particular welcome of a place that had been held by people who cared about it. Warmth, noise, Garrett being loudly relieved, Dax making tea without being asked, Finn standing in the corridor with an expression that suggested she had known exactly how this would go and was being gracious about not saying so. Rhea met them at the entrance. She looked at Mara for a moment. Then, with the deliberate precision of someone who never did anything accidentally, Welcome home, she said. Not gracious, not political, genuine. Mara nodded. Thank you. That night, late, Mara stood in the elder's chamber alone. Not because she'd been asked to, just because she needed to stand in a quiet place and take stock of everything that had moved through her life in the past 2 weeks. She was 26 years old. 2 weeks ago she had stood in a torch circle in her best dress and been told she was unworthy. She was a vessel, a bloodline 5 centuries in the making. A woman who had walked into the oldest gathering of supernatural power on the continent and reminded them all that force without choice was not power, it was only noise. She pressed her fingers to the mark on her collarbone. It was warm. It is always warm now. You're in here being philosophical, Selim said from the doorway. I'm in here processing, she said. He came and stood beside her. She leaned into him. Through the bond, steady, warm, the deepest knowing she had ever felt from another person. She felt his contentment, his peace, the settling of something that had been moving for 40 years. Finn says the bond will keep strengthening, he said. That at this rate, in 6 months, you'll be able to feel the entire court through it. That sounds overwhelming. She says you'll adapt. That the amplifier bloodline is specifically suited to holding large networks. A pause. She also says you'll probably be better at it than I am. Did that hurt your pride? A little. Yes. Mara laughed. She felt him feel it, the laugh moving through the bond and landing in him like it always did. Light in a room that had been dark. Hey, she said. Yes. I'm glad I misdialed. He looked at her, and the face that had been so carefully controlled the first night in the forest, so measured and guarded and exact. So am I, he said. And he meant it in the way that words mean things when someone has finally stopped being afraid to say them. Completely. Without reservation. Without walls. The end.
Mara walked into that circle expecting one story and got an entirely different one. If you felt every moment of that journey, the rejection, the awakening, the slow burn, and the moment she chose herself before she chose anyone else, then you already know what this channel is about. Stories that don't flinch, characters who carry real weight, bonds that are earned, not handed. If this story moved you, here's what you can do. Like this video. It tells the algorithm this story deserves to be heard. Comment below. Tell us your favorite moment. Was it the balcony scene, the claiming, or the moment Mara walked forward instead of back? We have a feeling the comment section is going to have a lot of opinions about Dorian. Let's hear them. Subscribe and hit the bell because Mara and Caleb's story continues, and the 12 are not finished yet. The next chapter of their world is coming, and you won't want to miss it. Share this with someone who needs a story about a woman who was underestimated by the wrong people. Wolf Bond Stories, where the bond always finds its way home.